Okay, thank you very much. Ambassador Sheen, thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited here at this conference. Thank you to IFANS and thank you to you again. I would speak about the transformation of and the evolution of the armed conflict around us, especially how difficult it has become to have the international humanitarian law, the law governing the armed conflict, respected on the ground, and how difficult it is to bring humanitarian aid and protection to the people in need. These overall trends, the observation, are the observation of the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, which was founded 153 years ago, but to address short-term crises, short-term battles, but found itself now working routinely operating in long-lasting ever conflicts of permanent wars or permanent armed violence. One of the root causes that we are observing of this prolonged conflict is that the lack of political consensus, and I join what my colleague and friend from the UNHCR said, the lack of political consensus of states or convergence of states on solving conflict, on stopping conflict. A few conflicts, if practically speaking, maybe none of the conflicts today ends with a military victory, and conflicts, very few, and solved politically. Superpowers are politically involved, if not involved directly in the field. The example is Syria, Ukraine, etc. But there are also power rivalries. Powers do not agree even on how to end the conflict, but also how to bring humanitarian assistance, to open humanitarian corridors. Even they do not agree even now how to let humanitarian aid entering a besieged town and to help the population. All these things has generated conflict that are prolonged, as I said, protracted, much more than in the past. Is it true that since 2008 the numbers of conflict have diminished, but there is a constant increase of number of victims and the destruction? Conflict, yes, tend to last longer than ever, and these create pools or areas of constant instability around the world. For example, in ICRC, we started to work in Yemen almost 50 years ago, and we're still there. 30 years of constant presence in the conflict in Afghanistan, 37 years of constant presence in Iraq, 47 years in Colombia, and I can continue. So these protracted conflicts are becoming the new normality. Today, conflicts are not fought anymore for an ideology or a very weak, far less ideological confrontation than before. War dynamics, conflict dynamics focus more on controlling mines, oil fields, natural resources, minerals, and the overlap very often with banditry, drug cartels, organized crime. There is a kind of mix of everything, political, economic, religious, ethnic revendication, all of them are overlapping. And nobody in this situation wants to solve the conflict. Nobody is interested to solve the conflict because by sitting in a negotiation table, sooner or later you will lose maybe some control of your territory, control of the natural resource, and therefore control of money. And this phenomena is not only affecting poor countries somewhere in the world that nobody knows, it's also affecting middle-income countries that never witnessed such occurrences before. And what we observe in the field, I'm basing, again, this observation from the presence in the field of the ICRC, also from my past experiences in some of these countries, is that conflicts are becoming more and more asymmetric and fragmented. There is no a single conflict in a country, in a given country, but different layers of multiple conflict in the same country. There are very rare interstate or conflict between two different countries. These are becoming very rare. The majority of the conflicts today, of the wars today, are internal wars or internal armed conflict. In the past, in the past, you had a legitimate government fighting against 1, 2, or maximum 3 armed opposition groups, and it was easy for an organization like us to meet these people and to discuss with these people the conduct of the hostility, the behavior in contact. We know where they are, we know how, and to discuss all the access, our access to bring humanitarian aid to the population under their control. But today, in this armed conflict, where you have a fragmentation of armed groups that are burning and they're splitting and they're starting fighting the legitimate government, but also starting to fight against each other. The example are under the eyes of everybody. You have in Syria, how many armed groups you have in Syria? Dozen armed groups, dozen of armed groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Libya, etc. So it's becoming a very difficult exercise. And also this, for a humanitarian organization to meet these people and to discuss their behavior in conduct and to have access to the population in need, because also they are not connected hierarchically. The commanders and the people in the field seems not very well connected, and also those who have political wings seems they are not in connection with the people in the field, and it's becoming difficult and dangerous for us to discuss what I said before, their behavior in combat and access. And we have to embark really in long, lengthy and very difficult negotiation. Just a reminder, I just read recently some statistics from my organization that this year in Syria we were able to perform 51 cross-line operation, meaning from one side you go to the other side in the hands of the territory controlled by another armed groups, and often you have to cross different territory or have to deal with different of these armed groups. Again, to see how it is difficult in such situation. But why we want to embark in contacting and talking with the armed groups in the field? Because we believe in the access of the people, but not just simply access, direct access to the victims. It's a matter of credibility of our organization, and it will be always at the center of our work and our preoccupation, the proximity of our staff with the victims, because we want to be close, to listen to them, to listen their worries and their tragedy, what happened to them, in order to be able also to bring focused and targeted humanitarian assistance, and check after bringing humanitarian assistance that this humanitarian assistance does not become their next security concern. And this cannot be done by using implementing agencies in the field, by using implementing partners, and also by not outsourcing the risk. So we are not outsourcing the risk, we take our risk to access the people. And I think this has also an impact on the whole psychology of the organization. But come back to the conflict, I would like also to speak about their spillover effects. It's nothing new, but conflict are not self-contained like they were before. They do not stop anymore at the border. There are an increasing of regional conflict, meaning conflict that they start local, but then they become national and they become over-national, regional or sub-regional. the examples, one of the examples is in Syria. Who could imagine that from some street protests in Aleppo, in Homs, in Damascus 5 or 6 years ago, there is now one of the fierce conflict in the world, influencing the countries of the region surrounding Syria, but also influencing Europe with millions of refugees heading to Europe. Also the Lake Chad with the Boko Haram effect on Nigeria, on Cameroon, on Burkina Faso. But another example is Somalia with their effects on Kenya and in Ethiopia. Another context is Southern Sudan and the surrounding countries. In such situations, borders evaporate, dissolve. Nobody is anymore in control of the borders. As said before, conflict are not were before local, but also with the terrorism that became that has gone global. Also, the fighting against the terrorism has gone global, and there are now an asymmetry between the rudimental method of warfare and the most sophisticated method of fighting the war. And conflicts, like in the past, were hidden from the public, but today are fought by publicizing these atrocities, and the way they are fought in the media, and especially in the social networks, in the social media. So we have protracted, asymmetrical, fragmented, regionalized, weaponized conflict, but also increasingly fought in urban areas, in major cities. With this trend, this world trend of the majority of the population of the world going to live into city, also the conflict is moved into city, and city becomes the real theaters of war. Again, not anymore or less in the rural area, in the countryside. We have the example, the besieged town of Aleppo and Homs in Syria, Mosul in Iraq, Lugansk in Ukraine. And in this situation, you have furious, but really furious attack on vital installation for the population in these cities: health, water, electricity, communication, education, completely destroyed. There is a really cumulative deterioration of the basic services. Hospitals and ambulances that are also coming under attack deliberately or by mistake, but they're under attack. We have the example of Kunduz a few months ago in Afghanistan. The example very recent, last week, of Aleppo's in Syria, very last hospitals that has been high strike bombed again. But also these vital installations are also violated by using from the combatants in the field, by using these vital installations to conduct attack. So, and also for the humanitarian organization, it has become difficult to bring humanitarian aid to these people living in these big towns. And we have to also transform the way we were bringing aid to the rural population to this new form of vulnerability. Because if you are a family that lost their house, or their house is damaged, destroyed, you have no water, no electricity, but you want to stay, and you have no job, you have no anymore job, no education for your children, how we can give you and help to again restart gaining the money for continual living. This is becoming really, really complicated. But I want to talk also about the weapons, the use of weapons. In the past, some type of weapons have been prohibited, and I think they should remain like that, to continually to remain prohibited. For example, gas, biochemical weapons, cluster ammunition, anti-personnel mine, etc. But some militaries, some armies, some non-state actors or armed groups have started to use it, to use them again. The example is the use of gas weapons in Syria and Iraq. And this was not only occasional. Oh, it was used by mistake once. No, it continued to be used. It's becoming recurrent, very worrying. But also, let's think at the legal weapons, the normal, for example, artillery weapons that can be used during an attack, during a battle. But they are used in highly densely populated area. They are used maybe to attack a military target, but surrounded by big buildings and apartments. So you have to also to think as this multiplication of the devastating effects of using legal weapons in a big, highly densely populated area. But we are living also in a mixed, a confused legal framework. The scenarios of today's conflict are a mix of criminal violence, interreligious, interethnic conflicts, as I said before. But for example, which legal framework you can use for defining the mass killing, recurrent killing committed by a drug cartels or a gang in Latin America? Is this a matter of an internal conflict? Is an internal war, or just an act of criminal, a criminal act, therefore governed by domestic law, and where international human rights law apply? And finding and defining this legal framework has become very difficult for the ICRC. We have to be very careful in transmitting the legal definition and our opinions on the different conflict, because it is important that from the legal definition correspond also the response from the military. If it is an internal conflict, again, it's governed by international humanitarian law, so the military have the right to kill in combat. But if it is a public order event, it is governed by domestic law, therefore human rights law apply, and the police has first to arrest and not to kill. But it's also difficult to explain the international humanitarian law, the Geneva Convention, the law ruling, governing the armed conflict. The ICRC has been and is still teaching IHL, the Geneva Convention, to hundreds of armies and armed groups in the world. But, well, these are basic principles, the distinction between civilians and military target, the precautionary measure that you have to take when launching an attack. But in some of today's armed conflict has become very challenging, very difficult to talk about this principle. Well, you do not know who is fighting, where is the battlefield, what is the battlefield, and to discuss conduct of hostilities with armies that not necessarily exist, or they do not want to meet you, or it's very risky to meet and discuss with them. So it's becoming increasingly a very challenging, difficult, and dangerous exercise. But ladies and gentlemen, the real issues here is the lack of compliance with international humanitarian law, with the law of the armed conflict. IHL, International Humanitarian Law, has been conceived since 1864, and in 1949 with the establishment of the 4 Geneva Conventions as an intrinsic, very pragmatic balance between military necessity and the protection of the civilian, the protection of those non-participating to the hostilities. But we are witnessing since several years a constant erosion of the international humanitarian law, of the norms contained in the international humanitarian law. This international humanitarian law often is denied in the name, for example, of the fighting against the terrorism, or because it is a matter of internal affair, of internal security of a given state. And we are witnessing some dangerous tolerance on certain forms of torture, a certain tolerance on the violations, tolerance of the so-called collateral damages. And those people ready to deny the medical care to the wounded enemy, or to the wounded enemy, but enemy population, let's say, they are on rise as well. We think there is a lack of appetite to further develop the international humanitarian law, and this lack of appetite we can identify is among the states. There is a lack of appetite to enforce these existing rules, because rules of behavior in combat are there. There might be no perfect, but the rules are there, but just need to be respected. And the responsibilities, again, is not of the ICRC to enforce respect, is the responsibility of the states, of the signatory to the Geneva Convention, but also of the armed groups on the field that are also bound by this law. And the consequences of these trends in armed conflict and the consequences of the disrespect of the law is that in today's ways of fighting wars have an enormous and long-term humanitarian impact, humanitarian consequences. And as my colleagues from the UNHCR said, the world never witnessed a so high number of refugees since the end of the Second World War, and also a so great disrespect for the law of war and its basic, and even its basic principle. But we always have in mind the conflict of this time, of the moment, those who are reported to us by the media, by the international mainstream media. But there's a lot of forgotten conflicts that where there are dozens of conflicts around the world that are dormant, and then suddenly, like a volcano, they erupt. You have a peak of violence for some weeks, some months, the media reporting about this conflict, but then going back, and they become again forgotten, though nobody is any more interested. But in this situation, destruction of installation, victims continue, but also destruction of hope and opportunities for the people living in such situation, where you have now millions of thousands or even millions of kids that are not going to school because of the destruction of their houses, because they are on the move, or simply because their schools have been destroyed. And this lack of perspective, for life perspective and education of their sons and daughters, are pushing millions of families to move out of their towns, to move out of their countries, and to become refugees. So, and let's imagine about the impact of millions of uneducated young people, the impact that these people can have in the world society in the next years, and also in the world security. So I think it's time to conclude. Well, I've described to you the challenges of the changing environment in which war are fought, and the challenges of humanitarian action in these situations, and the lack of political willingness to find solutions to stop the conflict and to address even the root causes of the conflict, resulting in conflict lasting longer and increasingly fragmented. And the impact of this fighting in the cities, in the big, in highly densely populated area, and then and also that the IHL, international humanitarian law, is eroded, is put under question, is under crisis and under erosion. Let me finish, yes, repeating what my colleagues and friends from UNHCR said. We as a humanitarian organization, we cannot solve all the humanitarian problem of the victims of the war. We can maybe just mitigate some of the dangerous effects, but it's the responsibility of the state to put a hand of the conflict. Thank you very much.